I hereby call to order this meeting of the District 200 School Board. Mrs. Hutchison, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crabtree?
Here.
Mrs. Erickson?
Here.
Mr. Gambiani?
Here.
Mr. Hamlin?
Here.
Mr. Matheson?
Here.
Mr. Paulson?
Here.
Mr. Broman?
Here. Mrs. Dahlquist, would you please lead us in the pledge?
I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will now ask for a motion to suspend the rules and adjourn to workshop setting with a second.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Crabtree,
Second.
seconded by Mr. Paulson. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mrs. Crabtree?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mrs. Erickson?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Hamlin?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Broman?
Yes, the motion passes. We are now in a workshop setting, and before I turn it over to Dr. Schuler, I just want to remind the board that our next meeting, business meeting, we're going to be reviewing the IASB resolutions, which were reviewed in the board packet at the last meeting, and the principles of operation that we reviewed when we had our self-evaluation meeting the last week. That will be up on the agenda, and that's been circulated to everyone. So with that, Dr. Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Broman. We have two topics on the Committee of the Whole agenda this evening. The first is that we wanted to give the board an update on our human resource. Actually, it's kind of a more global human resource update, but with a specific focus on a couple of the dashboard metrics that relate directly to it, as well as just identify for the board kind of fresh off of a new hiring season with the school year beginning. Some of both the challenges and celebrations that we have. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Rammer, who's going to lead you through that.
Thank you, Dr. Schuler. The format is similar to what we did last year, so that I think my intent or hope is that it's easy for you to track. Once again, this past year, in the beginning of this year, we were very busy in human resources. We hired 307 staff members, and that includes all of the hiring that we did in the district, support staff, administrators, summer recreation, summer school personnel. Processed 161 leaves of absence, 164 student teachers in our district, which is a celebration that we're always excited about, to be able to have student teachers from universities around the area to kind of watch them teach, and we often continue when we can to employ our student teachers who have done a good job for us. So that's an exciting piece and a good opportunity to have those new teachers in our district. 247 volunteers, and I point out that are only those are only the volunteers that are working on a regular basis in a building. That doesn't count the people that come in once in a while for maybe parties or celebrations. These are volunteers that are either chaperoning events, work with our students on a regular individual basis, or are at any time might be with those students alone. And then, as you have seen on our regular board meetings, process 59 Freedom of Information requests. The track record this year looks like we may exceed that this year, so it's a popular pastime for members of our community. Staffing, full-time equivalent, it's a pattern of our full-time equivalent license. Those were our teaching staff, up to 175 this year. We added those 9 positions in a variety of little places and little pieces, primarily in our EL and bilingual program, special education program. We hired an additional math coach, a little bit in PACE, incubator and ELO. We're just a few pieces because we've increased some sections in that. But that's a target that continues to move. We're opening another early childhood section on 2nd of December, so we'll need to add some additional staff for that. So those numbers kind of fluctuate during the course of the year. With that, we have roughly about 1,800 employees that govern that about 14 or 1,600 full-time equivalents, and that's because we have some part-time folks as well. Here's part of the dashboard that Dr. Schuler mentioned earlier. This has to do with the retention rate. Once again, this year we're at 97%. And if we take out, if we remove those people who move out of state, which generally indicates that they're not changing professions, they're moving out of state for other reasons other than leaving the district, we're at 98% on a retention rate. So we do track the reasons, including moving to another district, changing professions, seeking another career, and then obviously moving out of state. And so if we remove the out of state, we're at a 98% retention rate. Once again, just to take a look, to give you perspective as to where that 98% tracks nationally, the Society of Human Resources Management indicates that the highest retention rates are in high tech, municipalities, professional and trade associations, and utilities. Again, at 91, 92%, and remember we're at 97, 98% in District 200, which would suggest that people, I think two things. Number one, we do a very good job of hiring and spend a lot of time at the front end to make sure our hires are as successful as we can. And then once they're here, they stay here partially because of their performance and partially because they enjoy working in District 200. If we look at the statistics from the U.S. Department of Labor, they don't track retention rate. They track quit rate, which is the other side of the retention rate. And so U.S. Department of Labor reports for April through May of 2017 a 1.75 quit rate, or a 21% annual. And so again, if you overlay the District 200 with that, we're at 2 or 3% quit rate as opposed to the 21% nationally. One of the couple of things that we are beginning to be concerned about and are paying close attention to is employee shortages. And this is not parochial to District 200, it is becoming evident nationally. In August of this past year, 2017, Washington Post presented an article about teacher education enrollments dropping 35% from 2009 to 2014. Obviously, if students don't enter education programs, they can't graduate from education programs. The U.S. Department of Education in June published a study that talked about teacher shortage areas nationwide, and listing the areas of bilingual, foreign language, math, reading, science, and special education as shortages that they're seeing on a national basis. While we haven't particularly seen those shortages here in DuPage County at this point for licensed staff, we do continue to have some difficulty hiring some specific positions, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But we anticipate we've been a little isolated in DuPage County, partially because of the quality of education that is seen in districts like 200 here, and because of the economics in District 200. But we anticipate the shortage will get to us within the next couple of years. CNN, also in August 27, did an article about schools throughout the country are grappling with teacher shortages and the data that surrounds that. And here's a study that came out a year ago in August, the summer of 2016, that was specific to specific to Illinois. This study was published by the Business Association, School Business Association members, and surveyed 14 universities in Illinois that have education departments. And the elementary candidates in those education departments have decreased between 17 and 83%, which is really significant. I mean, that's a huge number. Secondary candidates, 20 to 83%, and early childhood candidates, 20 to 70%. So not only nationally, but certainly in Illinois, those young people, graduates going into education programs is diminishing significantly. And if we look at from 2017, in the next couple of years, that shortage we anticipate is going to hit us pretty hard. So as we look at the challenges in hiring, probably the major challenge we're facing right now are teaching assistants. Historically, teaching assistants and bus drivers kind of fall in the same category. When when the economy is good, when unemployment is low, those are two positions in education that are difficult to fill. People find other jobs, and so where they often come to schools when there's a high unemployment rate, that we're seeing a decline in that. Right now, there are 24 vacancies for teaching assistants in the district. And so with the camera on, if we could do a quick commercial, people are looking for jobs that are beneficial to others, supportive of the community, rewarding, challenging, and provide service for children. District 200 has a place for you if you're interested. And so go on our website, CUSD200.org. Under the departments, go to HR and scroll down to the employment opportunities, and we'd love to find a place for you in our district. We continue to also find challenges in finding substitute teachers, guest teachers. The same kind of notion economically plays out in that role. We currently have about 350 guest or substitute teachers on our rolls, and even with that number, we can't sustain and cover all positions at all the time. OT, PTs, nurses, EL and bilingual teachers continue to be a challenge for us to find, particularly the OT and nurses and EL and bilingual teachers. Part of that is a function of economics, part of it is a function of numbers. There just aren't a lot of OT, PTs and nurses out there that are either certified or willing to come to work in schools. And we have seen in the past year or two some challenges in finding science teachers. We've been kind of fortunate and have been able to fill those, but the pool of candidates is diminishing, as well as the quality of candidates. So that's an area that we're beginning to see, and as I said, we anticipate that that's going to be an issue moving forward. That's the quick and overview of human resources. I would certainly entertain any questions that you may have concerning those numbers or anything that I've shared with you.
I have a couple questions. When we add a section for our early learning, are we adding a self-contained section, or are we adding a multi-needs, regular classroom?
Yeah, at this point, it's typically a 3-year-old classroom or a 3- and 4-year-old classroom based on an open enrollment when students are eligible at their 3rd birthday and they have special education services. So it's a self-contained classroom, basically.
Okay, so it's not like we're then needing to find typical peers to fill. Okay, that was one question. Are other states in surrounding areas, Indiana, Wisconsin, facing the same issues we are, or is it? I know in the state of Illinois, you can't apply to the education, be an education major until you've passed your CAP test in your sophomore year. Other states don't have that. You can declare majors as a freshman. Is that part of our problem that we're facing? Is that test?
Absolutely. The TAP test, or teacher aptitude test, is a test that qualifies people to get in the program in Illinois and is part of your licensure. It's probably a much more rigorous test than in most states around, and the research would suggest in their polling that they believe that's one of the reasons that people are not going into it. It's just it doesn't translate well into the profession, and it's such a high bar that people go, I can do something else. Graduate in 4 years without, often that 50-year practice teaching. I don't have to go through those kind of hoops, and I'm just going to steer away from that one. So absolutely, that's an issue that is facing specifically Illinois.
And so that's our legislatures that passed that. And is there any way that, I mean, are any of our lobbyists out there working on behalf of that? Is that on the radar even?
It's been on the discussion point, because that's one of those areas that it's an issue, but it's going to be very difficult politically for people to take on, right? I mean, on one level, to say you're lowering your standards around the quality you expect into teaching programs, I think it will eventually happen, but I don't think I think it's going to take us really starting to see significant dire shortages, and I think we're on the front end of that. I really do. I think in the next couple of years, I think the state, in a couple more weeks, the state has a new tool where they release their their unfilled positions all around the state, and you can just see it. And you get out from collar counties, out from the suburban counties. The shortages are very real in certified positions. You move into DuPage, the shortages across all districts are in the teaching assistants and those categories. So I think in probably 2 more years, we're going to really start to see significant issues around teacher shortage, and I think something will be done at that point.
So my guess is it's the colleges and universities have to take the lead on that one. They're the ones who are losing the money, they're losing the kids in programs is what I'm guessing, to other states, into education and that, so I think that's all.
Illinois has historically been probably one of the bigger producers of teaching candidates. I mean, our universities have programs that have historically turned out lots of teaching candidates to service not only Illinois, but candidly surrounding states as well. So,
one of the issues that continues to face the problems in Illinois is the licensure requirement is much more stringent than it is in other states. They just a year ago, virtually you couldn't come to Illinois if you had a license in some other state. You just couldn't. There was no reciprocity. There was no acceptance of any certification in any other state. And the motivation was, well, we want to hire our own people. Well, that's okay, but when you raise the standard and drive them out, and you can't bring somebody in from another state, that becomes problematic. They just eased that requirement based on some shortages that the state was seeing. So, there are some people that are sensitive to that issue. But I think Dr. Schuler is right. There's not going to be great movement on that until enough districts start screaming about we can't find anybody to put in those places.
One other, I just want to mention, it's related to that you're really seeing an impact also as a result of that, is that's impacted not only the number of teaching candidates, it significantly has impacted the diversity of the teaching candidate pool as well. Those standards, increasing. There have been a number of studies that also just show there are not a lot of minority teaching candidates graduating, and virtually all school districts continue, our efforts to ensure that the diversity in our teaching population begins to look like the diversity within our student population, and that's just very difficult to do right now given this as well.
That report that the business officials released last year indicated that there would be 10 African American students graduating out of those 14 universities for the 850 districts in the state. Part of it is the requirements and I think, this is my editorial. I think another reason that we're seeing this nationally is that the continuing bashing of public education across the country, and I think people, young kids are saying, I want to go into something where teachers have been criticized either at home or publicly or through society, and then from an economic standpoint, although at the end of the schedule teaching pay is pretty good, but at the beginning of the schedule, they can start after a bachelor's degree making a lot more than the starting salary was for teacher, and can do it in less time. So I think there are a combination of issues that are contributing to this shortage nationally, and the one that we'll see in a few years.
Bob, in looking at the full-time equivalent numbers from 2015 to 2017, it's been pretty steady, with a slight increase this past year of 9, and yet our student enrollment has dipped slightly. What's the correlation that's going on here?
Well, again, where we're adding staff is in the specialty areas. These are not classroom teachers particularly, so we haven't increased classroom at the elementary or full-time classroom teachers. Part of this has to do certainly with the students that are presenting either through special education or through EL. As you see our numbers in those two programs begin to increase, and students present to us with significant challenge. Our increase in psychologists this classroom that we're going to add at the Early Learning Center. It's going to be a half-time teacher, 0.25 speech, 0.15 OT, and a 0.4 TA. So for a half-time teacher, we're adding almost as much in support services as we are for the teaching position. And so I think what we're seeing in a lot of cases is some significantly more severe disabilities, behavioral issues, where students are required to have support, a one-on-one aid, for example, or a one-on-one more support in terms of language acquisition, or more support in terms of psychology or social work, and that's where those increases are falling across the board. That's also the reason that we continue to have a challenge in the teaching assistants. Those are difficult positions, not only from responsibility, but simply to fill economically.
And is it also true, even with a small dip in enrollment that we maybe experienced over the last couple of years, if our average elementary classroom student-teacher ratio drops from 27 down to 26, you still need one teacher in that classroom?
Exactly. And we did. If you drop 200 students in total district population, divide 200 by 13 grades, that's 15 students per grade. So if you have 15 students in third grade and you have 13 elementary schools, that's one student. So even when you say, well, our enrollment went down. Well, right, but one student, 13 students across the board in 13 grades, it's not going to change any. It's not going to change it. We're not going to drop a classroom or drop a section at the middle school or high school.
The teaching aids, I think I was going to ask about what the type of that. It sounds like you just answered that question about what those are, but kind of historically, is that number 24 something we've dealt with? Is this number going up? And then how does that impact us and the kids in the classroom is what my core question is.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, Mr. Paulson. That number is increasing. The ability to fill those positions is becoming more and more difficult. We've increased our notification, our publication for those positions. Not only is it, do we do it locally with all those resources, we do it on a statewide. We send those vacancies to COD, to College of DuPage. We've done it on what are normally commercial websites. All our principals send notices to their families and saying if you have anybody interested that might want to provide those supports. We are also looking at contracting service for that. Most of those positions deal with special education students that are required to have those support services as part of their IEP. And so we're looking at a contract service to see if they can provide from a wider net some positions, at least in between, until we can find our own full-time people to put in there, but at least to give us some bodies to put in those positions. We have used, we're sometimes, in some cases, using our guest teachers. If they're not covering a class, we will put them in those supervisory, those teacher aide positions. And so, and in some cases, our principals are covering some of those when they have to.
So I guess just a follow-up to that is, it seems like there's a sense of competition that we're in with other school districts. In my business, we go to universities and go to their career day or whatever it is, and we recruit. We talk to people, collect resumes. Is that something that is done in public education, or are you seeing school districts do that, actually have somebody go down to universities and talk to graduating students?
We did that a number of years ago. Right now, today, we have more for teaching positions. We have plenty of candidates. And then there's some of those specialty ones that get a little dicey. But for our support staff for teaching assistants, we're not going to universities looking for teaching assistants. We've gone to minority job fairs in the past, but right now, half a dozen students in 10 schools, it's just not beneficial. But we do go to those when we find those needs. We do go to universities and recruit. But right now, we have probably 150 to 200 applicants per position.
On the teacher's aides, again, getting back to that, what's the kind of the average hourly rate on something like that? Are we a lot over minimum wage, or are these kind of low-end, low-pay positions?
$10, $12.
So literally, we're competing against McDonald's in effect for these, okay.
Dr. Emmer, if we look at the slides on retention, those statistics, I think, are national averages, right? We tend to, or we do use kind of a peer group for financial metrics. Are we able to get peer group data on retention to see if there's any correlation between the financial metrics and retention? That's the first question. The second is, maybe you're already aware of that data, is there any difference between our retention and our peer group retention?
We don't have, that's generally a metric that most districts don't carry them. We put it on our dashboard, but it's not one that is readily available either through our LUDA survey or our Forecast 5 piece. But I don't have that one out. It's readily available.
Is my assumption right that that's typically who we'll compete with for teachers and aides across the whole gamut of staff?
Why do we have so many leaves of absence class? That's like almost 15% of the staff. I'm sorry. What is that? I mean, I can't. It confuses me how much that could be that high. Is that 15% of our staff have babies? I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
See, we will not have an enrollment problem in the future. Maybe a teacher shortage.
We're growing our future teachers.
Yeah, some are medical leaves. Illnesses, long-term leaves of absence for childcare. But you'll notice in a pattern as your population becomes your employment population becomes younger. And if you remember, we retired 2 years ago over 100 people. As you bring in a younger employment pool, those are people who, as Erica said, are young families beginning to have babies. They take leaves of absence for not only maternity but move on for child rearing. There are a number of that number also includes FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act. So it covers all of the possibilities in addition to illness and child rearing.
One more quick question. On the guest teachers, our salary or our pay for that, are we competitive with our surrounding districts?
No, we're not. But when I meet with my the peers in other districts, regardless of what they're paying, they're all facing the same issue. So even those districts that pay $15, $20, $30 more than we do, and we say, how you doing? If we can't find it, we can't find enough people, we're not covered, we're understaffed, we can't find anybody. And so I think economics might help a little bit, but it won't solve the problem because it is just a national trend, it's a regional trend. Economics may move us a little bit, but it won't change it overall. And as we look at budget issues, it is always a dollar choice about where we want to put our money.
So if you were to look out 3, 4, 5 years, what concerns you the most? What's hiring? Is it sciences? Is it teaching assistants? What should we be worried about?
Yeah, I think there's two of them that I would focus on, Paulson. One, I think the teaching assistants continue to be an issue, and we've got to find a way. We have to find a way either to change our service model or to find a way to attract people to do this job. And I think you remember in the last bargaining agreement we added a pay differential for people that are doing some of those most difficult jobs, changing diapers and feeding tubes. These jobs are no longer what they used to be when I started, is to come in and sit with kids and kind of read with them. These are very challenging jobs, and so either change the model or we have to make it more economically beneficial to them. I think the other thing that I'm certainly concerned about is those specialty areas of instruction: math, science, foreign language, bilingual. Those are the things that were have always been challenging. But I think those are going to be very, very difficult in the next couple of years, those specialty certification or licensure pieces.
One more thing, Dr. Raymond. When you're talking about changing the model, is that an outsource / contract services concept? Is that what that means?
No, I think Dr. Panopoulos and the HR department, we've begun to have conversations about, is there a different way to either group, to provide services, other ways to address those needs of our students who come with an IEP. There's no magic bullet out there, you know, when a student presents a disability that requires a one-on-one support service, I'm not sure what else that looks like. But maybe there's ways around the margin, if we can work around the margin a little bit to reduce the number if we can with a different service model. I think that would help. Although I think, you know, we're in the process of, as I said, looking at a contract with an outside agency, you know, staffing agency. I don't have high intention that they're going to be able to produce any more bodies than we are. But we'll see. If that in fact works out, hallelujah, you know, we may have dodged the bullet, if you will, at that point. But my guess is they're not going to, because what they're charging us and what we're paying isn't significantly different.
Thank you, Dr. Ram. Dr. Schmidt?
Great. So I'm going to transition now to Mrs. Dahlquist, who is going to walk the board through some discussion and planning around the dashboard. So as we quickly approach the year 2018, those were the kind of the target dates around our current dashboard metrics. And so we want to start a conversation this evening looking ahead at what are the specific goals or targets that we want to have on our radar as we look ahead to the next couple of years. So Keith is leading this really from, I guess, two vantage points. One obviously being, you know, the dashboard metrics, especially around student learning and the learning conditions, certainly mirror her department and responsibility in the district. She's also taking this on as part of an internship opportunity this year as well through a graduate program. So I think I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks. So I'm going to walk us through a little bit. You'll see the construction cone is on here because this is a building. We want to have input from everybody around the table. This isn't the final copy of what that draft would be. If you look at the very next slide with Vision 2018, that heart there in the middle is all about our learning environment. And that'll continue, of course, to be a great big focus for all of us. Things to think about, and I think it's a little more difficult each year when you think about how technology is exploding and how fast careers are changing, but we have to think about what are the skills that our students are going to need. I know that everybody's been thinking about the redefining ready, and that's certainly giving us some guidance as to the things that we'll be looking forward toward the future. You also have to think about the changes in jobs and careers. Think about technology and how communication is changing and all of that, and try to envision the lives that our students are going to have once they graduate from us. So 3 parts that I want to talk about, just kind of, you know, what skills are they going to need? Also, does our mission statement currently address those? And then start looking into what do we want to look at for the next 4 years in regards to student learning. So I'm going to start a little bit with some big thoughts. And I want you to think about 3 to 5 phrases or words that come to mind when you think of, you know, when I started, and that was a long time ago in education, it was all about what knowledge do you have, how can you show off that knowledge, what knowledge can you portray to the rest of the world. Siri and Google are now making knowledge pretty accessible to anybody and everybody, and it's more of that application piece and what you can do with that. Lots of stories about how human labor is being replaced by robots and computers, and what all is that going to take into effect. And then also think about, we've been talking about college readiness. Now, career was always in there, but certainly the accountability measures and everything that people have been focusing on is college ready. And that is still a great path for many of our students. But it's not the only path to success after high school, and we need to be thinking about what does that mean. So think about it for a little bit. Just jot down a few phrases of what that means to you and what we want to maybe address in the future. probably some of the things that you wrote down are easily measured, and some of the things that you wrote down would be really hard to measure about what are you wanting for our students to have in learning environment. And we're gonna spend a little time wrestling with that. I wanna put up our mission statement on here. And I kinda had my list of some of those things too. When I come up with my list, this mission statement, and I wasn't around when it was created, but still resonates with me and still guides my thinking in what we are about here. And from my vantage point, I don't see that this needs to be revised or redone, but I think it's good that we check in with that. So what are you all thinking about whether that still meets what we want?
We reviewed that a couple years ago, right? And we were very worried on one word, and I don't remember what the word was.
Well, not only that, but we reviewed the mission kind of in a general sense at our self-evaluation board meeting. And I hope I'm not speaking out of line here, but I think Faith would be surprised at how many of us embraced that mission in what we wanted to achieve for the district. So, but I'll certainly let my fellow board members speak up on that.
I mean, there's words in there I love, probably the same words I love: inspire, I love challenge. You know, I'm continually thinking about the importance of failure and how to fail forward, I think was something we heard in Redefining Ready, and I don't know that I want to put fail in there, but resiliency is a word that we use a lot in my business about a variety of things. And I like the fact that personal development is important. So those are the things that resonate with me.
Service is one thing that I would like to see somehow tied in there. I know a lot of our students do participate in quite a large amount of community service, but I think everybody benefits from community service, and is there a way we can tie that into part of this too? The other thing I see is, and maybe not necessarily a mission, but it's how can we get them to apply the knowledge that they're learning, more internship opportunities. I mean, that would be, I think, a great opportunity. Our kids keep taking more AP, but are they really getting out there and applying the skills that they've learned? So somehow I'd like to see that.
I'd like to add, not add, but a couple suggestions. Measure or assess. You know, we're inspiring, we're educating, but are we measuring that process and that progress? And maybe somehow to weave that assessment, measurement into that statement might support some of the elements that are there.
One thing just to call out, and no one's mentioned yet, is the word support. I'll just say, point my fingers at myself and say, being on the board for the last X number of months has opened my eyes to the amount of educational challenges we have in our student population. It's amazing to me because we tend to think of Wheaton, Warrenville, Carroll Stream, go down the list, as it's almost like a perfect place. And it's just not. And there are so many student needs out there. That word support is so important. It's going to be growing. It's going to consume more of our budget, more of our resources. We talked about the shortage of talent in special needs areas. We can't forget that because we want to measure the top portion of our student body. We tend to forget about the others with different socioeconomic challenges as well. So I don't know if you highlight it, bold it, underline it, just can't forget it. And I know we all agree to that. Just wanted to call that out.
I think when we look at the mission statement, there are general terms in there that they mean different things. Like when I first came in support, we weren't talking as much about MTSS and all of the different levels. We weren't talking about our English learners. So that support piece, means different things as we move through this. I think that personalized learning, when I was first coming here, that wasn't a big, how we were going to do all of that. And so the impact of a really good mission statement is when it is focused enough to give direction, but general enough that it isn't, here's the specifics. So I heard resiliency, I heard the need for service, I heard how do we apply it, I heard how do we measure it, the importance of support. I think that as we go through and talk about the different pieces that we're going to add to the dashboard of what we're trying to, that some of those details may come out in that work and not need to revise the mission statement, but if we're feeling like we need to go through that after that's an option. But I think what you put in the meat of what we're going to do and what we communicate out and the specific projects that we will embark on may meet those needs that you see aren't as specific in the mission statement. So I think let's go through a little bit more, keep going through. You'll see the word internships later. On what are some of those pieces that we could look at. So this is currently what's on the dashboard. I just literally took a picture of what pops up on the screen and what that looks like. So we would be reminded of the different things that we are currently looking at. There are some needs of why we need to change this. The state and the assessment is no longer the ACT, it's moving to SAT. It has moved to SAT, so we need to figure out how we're going to react to that. There are also our look-fors in our learning environment have changed since we last did this, and that need for that application piece, the need for resiliency or the SEL, all of those things are new areas of focus and things that we need to look at. So we need to make sure that those are being measured, as you said, and how do we chart that progress. So a guiding item for me is always our district vision for what that learning environment is, where we talk about kids have got to be able to synthesize and share language, they've got to be able to collaborate and create, they need to foster that real world situation, being able to meet all those individual needs with the support, but it's still developing mastery of skills, whether we're talking about reading or math or social emotional standards, how do we get all of that into our learning environments. We've been working on a variety of things with the different focus. The most recent is differentiation, personalization, and individualization. And I really thought with the new chance to revise the dashboard, we needed to make that vision of that learning environment more front and center. So you have a one-sheet piece of paper there that would be more of what the draft of the dashboard is, but I'm walking through the different parts of it. Where I would like to see us have the vision statement of the learning environment be right up front, that some things are really easy to measure. Creativity is a little harder to say, 38% of the world is creative and now 41% of our students are. So some of those things are not easily reported, but they're more of a narrative. They're more of, are we moving along in those processes? We'll still continue to have student outcomes and some other indicators on the environment as well. So we're moving away from ACT and now going to SAT. I think that the world will still be keeping track of what the average SAT score is, so we should be as well. If you look at that next measurement that's on there of the percent of students, we spent a lot of time, we think that really busy graph from the last time we were there for the committee of the whole of our upper students, what percent are making that adequate growth, and really keeping track of the students that are here from 8th grade on and looking at that. That's a really good measurement for us to keep track of. It is a little bit problematic of putting it on the dashboard because it's going to be a few years before you can put a stat in that box. We've just switched over to SAT. They're going to be, before you take how much growth is happening from grade 8 to senior year and having an average, that's going to be a blank spot on there for a little while, or our best guess of what average growth would be. And you probably have seen all of the publicity where here's what Illinois said the SAT should be and here's what college said, so we want to have a measurement for SAT, and I do think it's important to look at that growth, but because the metric has changed, it's going to take a little time to have that down. Yes?
On that point, Faith, there was some talk about being able to come up with some sort of a logarithm that would convert ACT scores to SAT equivalents. Is that available?
Yes, there's being able to go back and forth to be able to do that, and that could be something we could do in the interim. I don't know that you want to say that that's your long-term piece, but that is something that we could look at transitioning to this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I was wondering, where do the baseline numbers come from, and is that where some sort of a conversion from ACT to SAT would start us out? Right, where we already had baseline data or it was easily accessible, I threw that in here. Like some of it was already on our current dashboard. The items in white, for example, are part of our dashboard already. The items in green are what would be new and where we were on some of these measurements. So we would definitely, part of the timeline here would be after we agree on our measurement tools, I'll go back with the administrators and the principals and talk about, okay, where are we currently, what stats are going to feed into that and help set that goal for 2022.
But baseline as of when? Where's baseline?
Baseline would be now. Our current dashboard, if I go back, has kind of the initial baseline, then the update on the status, and then that. So the very first year, the initial baseline and the current year would be the same. Our thinking the last time we created the dashboard was that we needed to see where we were in progress, and where we're trying to get to. So for right now, baseline and current year, I took back baseline from where we were when it started. We'd have to talk about whether we want baseline to be the whole, from when district assessment started, or from the time that we reset the dashboard. Right.
Faith, is there a reason why we don't have a communication one, a writing one, something that we have math and we have reading? And I think to myself, what is the most important skill our kids need to walk away from in its communication?
It's almost like you planted that question.
Sorry.
So that is one of the areas that I'm looking at more in the applications into real world. And we've been doing it, if you're talking with teachers, they're all struggling with how do we do the writing piece, what does this look like? And I don't want to be short-sighted to just call it writing. With the demands on Korea video, a lot of interviews send us a 2-minute video. My son just recently did a college application where it was send us a video. The more and more I meet with new staff, they're not saying, hey Faith, put a memo together on that. Like, can you put a video? I was here early this morning putting together a video for staff about how we're doing with things. So I'd like that to be more of a communication/production piece, and definitely the same skills from writing fit into that. You still have to be organized, you still have to know who your audience is and pick appropriate words, you still have to have convincing, but that extra piece of having to be able to present it and know how to video it, think about the visuals that are going on behind you, what other kinds of graphic, even to type of your pace on what's the right tone. That's a whole nother layer of application into the basics of writing. As you're like, why isn't a measurement up there? There isn't a district-wide assessment that's given to writing, or a district or a statewide, or that thing, especially for elementary to the middle. You could do it with a rubric type of a thing, where you graded students on that. The downside and the good side of that is it can be very subjective. It's not a multiple choice test where here were the right answers and here were the wrong answers. But that is definitely a piece of the learning environment that I want to measure. And if you look, if you skip ahead to page 2, or the flip side of the dashboard, that is something that I want us to address.
There's this is the draft of the student learning dashboard. When I look at these things, I look at them as, I'll call them high-level achievement students. We're talking about graduation rate, we're talking about, college readiness and all these things. I guess 30% or thereabouts of our population, our student population is low income, not as high achievers. And we see that when we look at test scores and we break those test scores out and so on. So, I'd really like to add some other student outcomes that deal with that population and show the growth in that population of students that, are kind of the byproduct of these, the opposite side, but, really identify those. So, that we're, because again, it's a big number, and it's, graduation rate may not be the, or let's say graduation to college readiness, and that population may not be as high as what, or I'd like to see that higher, let's say that way.
Okay.
So I think that, I'd like to focus on that level, those 30%, which has been a growing number in our district for a number of years now. So, and I think that, when I look at that, I think there's some, with that population as well, I think there's life skills that we need to address, whether it's, understanding, how to live in a financial, budgeting, let's call it, if you don't go on to college, or even if you do, how do you understand how to, borrow money or, pay for college and things like that. Or, I hear people say, kids can't get change anymore, that type of thing. They work in the grocery store, So I mean, though, and I think that again, one other thing that I thought of was one of the programs we went to at the ISAB or whatever it is. The students have to see the goal to understand it or try to achieve it. And I don't know how we do that, is it, maybe participation in organizations by that community or population of students, things like that I generally don't see that we evaluate, or indirectly we do by the fact that, if we were to say that the readiness, if we back out that lower group, these are higher groups and we're going to have 80% instead of 66. So, I think we need to focus on that group in some way in our learning dashboard. So,
Right, I want to caution a little bit that yes, the students that come from lower income families, there's definitely a higher percentage of low achievement, but we certainly have students that come from low income that are really high achieving students that go on and get great scholarships to college and things too. So it's a generality, but it's definitely not the rule on that. I'm not sure if you're talking about addressing the achievement gap. I spend a lot of time talking with principals and that of looking at the different subgroups of how are your low-income students doing versus your non-low-income. Looking at that, I look by gender, I look by race, and we keep track of that. So there are systems in place and things that we look at that. It's whether you want it on the district dashboard, and is it about decreasing the achievement gap between those two subgroups, or are you talking about other indicators of success, like some of the things when you talked about how do we make sure that they know what the goal is. One of the great things that a lot of the online reading programs do is you first do an inventory with their middle school students about like, what are you interested in? What do you want to do? And if they say cosmetologist or they say this, or you go through them and say, here's the reading level that you're going to need to be able to do that. And it's pretty high, and matching up with what they want to do with the reading piece, not always that it's, I'm going to go on and get my master's degree and my doctorate degree. Even, if you're going to go straight into the workforce, you still need to have a pretty high reading level and drawing those connections. But those things don't typically show up on the dashboard. I agree with you that it would be good. I'm struggling to.
Well, I think again, we break out data as, every time we see test results, we break out data. And I recognize that anyone can achieve, any student can achieve whatever. But even your example of the cosmetologist, that, I want to make sure they understand they can be a rocket science as well. That type of thing. And I don't know how we measure that, maybe, but I don't want to keep breaking out data and say that, if we look at this readiness factor and we back out this, or the ACTs, I think we've done that in the past, and we broke out this subcategory, and then if we do that, so, and again, we've seen that data, but it's not at this level, this dashboard level. So I guess I'd like to see that enhanced, because again, we're seeing more and more students like that, or our percentages are growing, and, for whatever that reason that is, and it's just, I think I would like to say, can we focus more on that and hit some targets that, so the kids can see what the goals may be, and how to achieve them. I don't know how to measure that. That's kind of, I'm going to say to you, it's the one thing that I react to when I see this kind of a chart, to be truthful. So.
Okay.
Well, don't the alternative standards we're trying to develop determine if a student is college and career ready will help along that line, their attendance rate in school, if it exceeds 90% or more, the intern programs that they might be available to where they can learn a skill while they're going, the service projects they perform, or service clerkship they are developing. Will be alternative ways we can determine if students are achieving career readiness
Correct.
apart from a SAT score or graduation rate or whatever.
Right, there are some things on the draft of the dashboard that address what you're talking about, but we can go back and look at some other indicators as well. But you're right, attendance, curriculum, whether that plays in with some service pieces, whether they're involved in other things, but I'm not sure that it's addressing what you were talking about of how are we helping them see how prepared they'll need to be for the future.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate goal. But, if we go back to our mission, I don't know if I'd say reach their, I'd say achieve their maximum goal or potential. And again, I think when some of the things Jim just mentioned, there might be some interrelationships that we see that are consistent. Maybe it's clubs, maybe it's not clubs. But all these things are going to combine. Maybe if we see an increase in something, it'll imply that there's going to be an increase in another. I think the issue I'm getting at is we don't see that measurement. At this level, other than the byproduct of why, when I look at some of the career ready statements, and I think it's 70%, to me, that's 30% short of where we want to be, okay? And many times we break that down, it might be, or college ready, I think is a better term. That might be because that is the goal of many students. And, and I don't know that it should be our goal that everyone goes to college either. So, how are we preparing those students? What are the units of measure we can see that? And I think we've had those breakdowns. I recall a kind of a dot graph of how this district achieves with that category of student compared to other peer groups. And, we do really well at that. So, I want to make sure that, the only time I've seen that, to be true, was on that scattergram that we had. And so I'd like to see it a little higher level, focusing on that group of students that, that kind of makes some of these numbers lower, in effect, by the fact they're included. So.
Can I throw in something? I think related to what Jim is saying, if there was something beyond the graduation rate, there was something more along the lines of the percent of students who have a post-secondary plan. And I know there was some chatter in the media last year about CPS talking about requiring students to present what their plan was in order to graduate. So I'm not thinking about that necessarily, but the idea is there, so that we're not just looking at are you graduating or are you going to college, but making sure that we are trying to make sure we reach every student to determine where it is they are going. And make sure that the kids who maybe aren't going to college realize that it's not college or I've failed. It's college or I have other options and somebody's helping me think them through.
I think we grabbed that I remember I did a map for Wheaton North of what kids are doing, and it was military, it was everything, and they grabbed that data in an end of the year survey.
Correct.
Yeah.
Say that again,
So they grabbed data, they asked the senior population, what are your plans? Are you going into military? Are you going into a trade? Are you going into a 2-year, a 4-year? Where are you going? We did grab that, I know we grabbed that data as a district, so that would be probably a good thing. Can I ask where the 50% came from on the co-curricular? Because it seems very low.
Sure. So right now, our student information system really struggles to be, thank you.
I didn't realize it wasn't in there. Right now, the way our student information system would be able to take that is, it's not built in to Synergy. So we have high schools that are collecting that by some survey and Excel data. That's not a really robust system of doing that. So we would have to develop some better systems if that became this measurement. We're also in limbo waiting for what the state is going to say those requirements are. And we didn't want to build a system and then have the state in 4 or 5 months say, but this is what we define a co-curricular activity. So I agree with you that that number is low. We would have to work on our data delivery system to be able to have that be our main marker. I'm talking with Julio every day, and the state hasn't said this is what it's going to be yet on what those defines are. For example, if a student does something outside of a high school and it's a club or an activity that they do with their church or a community group, does that count? Does it not count? Is it what constitutes an activity? If you are in a club that only meets 4 times a year, does that count? Does it not count? How regular does your attendance need to be? Can you report it out that you were in it only for half of a year and then dropped out? All of those things need some more defining to have that be what that number would be.
So the outcomes are defined by the state, or are they defined by us?
Right now, it's us, and we're just getting ready to be able to be what that is, but really, we haven't instituted keeping track of this in a full manner because we're waiting on what the state requirements would be, and the state is coming up with part of that redefining ready of how do we look at that data and how are they going to pull that data, and then they're going to report that out as well. And we don't want to have our system be that different from what the state is going to put on an Illinois report card, where we say 82% of our students were in a co-curricular activity, but the state says 60. So we want to we've been waiting to build some of our systems to get more information from the state.
Okay, so I guess what I'm saying is, so these metrics, that these outcomes that we're deciding, we have a say-so into what outcomes come on here, correct? As a district, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess part of me is wondering why wouldn't we want to mirror what colleges are asking for and what careers are asking for our outcomes to be? So if they're asking for more communication, like a communication line, or they're asking for a service, or they're asking for an internship, or they're asking for, should we be looking at that, what colleges and careers are asking for, to say that these are going to be the outcomes that we're looking for? We define the number, but that these are the outcomes we're looking for.
Sure, I think that plays into it. You also don't want to have a measurement that has the same title that community members can look up and say, well, Illinois report card says you're this involved. Or even, we get into that even on something like the district math assessments. We set up what our targets were to be so they come close to what the state is saying is grade 3 equivalent of ready and passing of park. So that there's not a really big mismatch between what we are saying is grade level appropriate, but sometimes the state changes. If you live through what ISAT was, and then the more improved and more rigorous ISAT or what IGAP was before that, it does fluctuate, and you don't want to have a miscommunication out to the public of like, well, district assessments say that 80% of your students are on grade level, but the state only says. So I agree that it needs to be what do our students need, but we also have to make sure that we're measuring ourselves in a similar way that the state and everybody else is going to measure us, so that we don't lose track of that too. And it's a balance, in my mind.
Faith? I would just suggest, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about this particular line item, but since the data is somewhat ambiguous, I think you're better served to just remove it, because I think it's going to cause more questions than not, and it's not, you're going to subject, not you personally, but will be subjected to the questions, and really we shouldn't be, because the numbers aren't accurate because of the reasons you're suggesting. So I don't know
Which one?
the one we're speaking about, the percent of high school students in the co-curricular. I mean, that's just a thought, because if those numbers are somewhat guesstimates, it may serve us better just to remove that until we have accurate information, whether it's state-driven or SIS-driven or something of that nature. Is that worthy of thinking about? I don't know.
I think that's a possibility. We're also got a while to build this, so I don't know if we want to leave it on as a here we are and see if the state comes up with what that would be, and then our student information system will have to report things out to the state. It depends on how impactful we believe that is. I think that goes into what you were talking about of how do we build that learning environment. There's so much that goes in with our fit learning environment and those application of all of those pieces in our co-curriculars. We will be keeping track of it some way for redefining ready. The state just hasn't quite decided what that would be. So I'm fine with leaving it off. My suggestion would be keep it on.
Faith, I'm not. I think if we think that that's an absolutely essential element toward being college and career ready, I don't think we should take it off. I guess the one thing I would add to the board discussion right now is I wouldn't get too hung up on the number components yet. We can flesh out exactly how the measurement takes place, what the baseline, and I think what a reasonable goal is. We've still got time. I think the more essential element to the discussion tonight is, are we measuring the things that are important for us to measure as we think about student outcomes, student experience? And so if we could, there's two more slides that again, I guess conceptually, I want you to think about these 3 slides working together in aggregate. This isn't the only component to the dashboard, right? This gets combined with the next 2 slides that have a couple of other pieces. So maybe let's kind of go through all of those, and then we can kind of talk about this in its aggregate to see if the key pieces that the board wants to see on the dashboard are there and reflected in some way. That makes sense?
So along with the other things on student outcomes, we're looking at other indicators. We've got graduation rate, I guess it's on here twice. We moved it off of the first one. And then that attendance rate piece, but this is a change from the type of attendance we had been looking at. The attendance we had been looking at is what is your average, of days that students are here, and looking at that. What I'd like to see is more of, what percentage of our students are at that level that they're here at school often enough that they would be successful? Not just, everybody can't strive for 100% attendance. People do get sick. People do have doctor's appointments, have all of those kinds of things. So this metric is more at what of our percentage of students are here for at least 90% of the school year. And that wasn't just some random number that I came up with. That was kind of what research, and even research will say even a little bit lower than that, and you can be successful at school. And then that is what our current number would be, and I had Julie run that data. But again, don't get hung up on the numbers. I'm just wondering if we want to change the attendance from not just what your average is, but what percentage of our kids are here enough of the time that they should be successful, and change that measurement. And then also wanted to change, we've been doing great work, just had another meeting with the high school principals not just yesterday, it was last night. And all of that work for the advanced AP classes that we take, and we've really done a great job. I can't take credit for it, but the high school staff and Julio have done a lot of work with raising that, and we still want to look at that, but we're also starting to look a lot at dual credit and being able to have students take classes in high school and actually get college credit for that. And as other districts have done that, sometimes you're pooling from the same group of kids. And there's a choice of, am I going to take an advanced placement course, or am I going to take actual credit? And I think both of those meet that goal of what we're wanting to have students do, is have access to that piece. So I didn't want to limit our thinking just to advanced placement course percentage. I'm looking for, can we combine, you're getting a C or higher in those AP classes, or a dual credit class, and lump those percentages together. And so that as we offer dual credit, it doesn't look like we're decreasing our advanced placement opportunities.
Okay, this 65% baseline figure, so 65% of the students in our high schools are taking an AP course or dual credit course and earning a C with that. That's the way you read that.
Correct.
It's not that 65% of those taking an AP course.
Exactly. Thank you for that clarification. No, the percentage for students that are in those classes is up in the 90th percentile that's doing that. But this is just what of our student body has had access and is doing well enough to get a C in one of those classes.
If I read that, I read it as Jim said. I
Okay.
think it's very confusing. I think it's saying that 65% of students earning a C or,
Okay,
I think.
I can fix that. Percent of students graduating that have obtained a C or higher, I can change that word, that's certainly a good catch.
You know, I'm looking at I'm blinking. There we go. When I look at this one, the attendance category, again, I'm looking at a statistic. How do we control that? I mean, that's number one. And two, this kind of goes correlating with what I talked about earlier. I think that we would find if we broke that down, the higher achieving students are there 95% of the time. And if we categorize that population I was referring to before, that's going to be more impactful if they're attending more. You know, and so if there's a way to get people to attend more, I think we're going to see a true big improvement both on all the statistics. If that category, whatever we want to call that, is attending more, achieving more, all the relationship. You know, to me, that's the one that's going to have the biggest impact because the high achieving students are going to be there every day, doing what they do, getting high ACT scores and so on. I think historically that's the case. So it's really that group that, you know, is a growing population we have that, you know, I would like to be able to kind of monitor, I guess, is the issue of all this.
So more of a breakout of the different groups within that category.
Yeah, again, you know, I think, again, that tells me something then. You know, it tells me that we're, you know, we're doing something to achieve. I think we have impact, or we can have more impact on the groups that are causing that to be less than 90%. Okay, or whatever the right, you know.
And there are some things that are in our control of that, and then there are hospitalizations, there are other things that happen that we don't have an impact on.
But I mean, we're monitoring it there, so, you know, if we're monitoring it, you know, I understand those are the factors, and that's why we're not 100% or whatever.
Right.
You know, again, the groups that, if we can show, I guess I'm trying to say that if we can show parents of students that in the affected group I'm calling, that by making sure your kids are there every day, we're gonna have better achievement. That's kind of what I'm trying to get to is, you know, show, you know, bring the parents in the process or the students for that matter and show them why, you know, this is why it's important to come every day. And, you know, and these are part of the goals you're going to achieve. I think to me, that's going to cause all these statistics to go up because our higher achieving students are, you know, they're 95% there all the time. You know, so I don't know, you know, I think I understand the categorization issues, but I think we have the ability to have more impact and raise some of these standards by dealing with the groups that are most affected by it.
Right, and yet there are some really high achieving students that miss a lot of school too.
I'm sure there are, but, you know, again, I'm talking about mass numbers here. So if I'm talking about 13,000 students, 30% of whom is, 3,000, 4,000 students, you know, that were in the lower income categories or whatever, I think these percentages would be very skewed by that. Maybe I'm wrong, okay? But I think if we,
Can I ask you a question, just so I guess I want to understand the suggestion as it would apply to a dashboard? Are you suggesting a separate dashboard that applies only to low-income students? That's somehow tracked apart? So I mean, I get what you're saying, but bottom line is the purpose of a dashboard, right, is to take, I think, a big picture system temperature around these items, right? Now, as you study these, right, so bottom line is if the percentage of students here 90% of the time is not what we want it to be, then of course we've got to break that data down and find out who are those students, why are they not here, and what systems or strategies can we put in place to help those students, improve their attendance. That's the administrative work, right? That's our effort to say, based on these targets that you've set, if we're not where we want to be, how do we get there, right? That's kind of the administrative work to take the targets and bring those down into, what specific systems, structures, processes do we have to put in place, right, to kind of bring about the goal. But really, at my view is at the board level, you are setting the big picture system targets, what do you want us to monitor? And as we report that to you, as we always do, there's going to be additional detail on, why are we at this particular level? What's causing us to, to not be there? But I guess I'm not fully understanding the suggestion around how would it look different on a dashboard.
I think that what I'm getting at is I think as I've looked at, for instance, at ACTs, I mean, that number varies minutely over the last number of years. Clearly not a standard deviation away from anything. And so, but when we break down the details of that, the subgroups, which we categorize in the way I'm trying to categorize this, there is movement, a lot more movement. So that, so my belief is that if we can focus more on that subgroup, we will see a higher achievement overall on the mass group. Because the high achievement, let's call it the 70% of the non-low income students, I think again are going to have a relatively stable, high achieving numbers and so on. So if we want to have more impact to move these numbers, I'm saying, I believe, and I don't know that because we don't have a dashboard on it, I believe that subgroup is the one that would be affecting those numbers more, and we have more ability to impact that group than we will. Are we going to tell the higher achieving students not to join a club or to join a club? They're already doing that. Are they worried about ACTs? Yeah, they are, and they're, and similarly. So, again, where is our goal? I guess my goal, if you want to summarize the goal, is I want to see better achievement, a statistical something for what I would call a category of a growing group of population of students that we have called or identified in many, many conversations to be the low income, or, whatever the term is. I'd like to see that being part of the dashboard in whatever way we get there.
So you'd want to see a dashboard specifically applied only to low income?
Again, maybe it's not every category, okay, but some categories of, again, I'm saying there's an indicator, that we're dealing with indicators. I would like to see some indicator or indicators that deal with that subcategory group that we have the ability to have the most impact on, in my belief, because we're providing new things. I saw it on the charts we did with the ACT on the breakdowns. So, again, is it subcategories? It's a group that I think that I would like to make sure we're focusing on getting achievement on. So, whatever categories, that's your job. I'm saying I would like to see that we're making significant progress on a group that we can have the most impact.
Yeah, it's my job only if I can clearly understand the target. So
I'm trying to identify the
I want to make sure Jim's not on an island on this one, right? So there is, we've talked about this before in through a lot of different lenses, and I don't think we quite know what the right metric is to make sure we're serving a population the right way. And I don't want to just classify it as low income. There's probably some other way to group it, but we might need to do a little work as a team to figure out what that looks like. And I don't think we have a clear definition yet to identify how to make sure we're serving that group the right way. So I don't want, two points. One is Jim's not on an island. I echo his concern. Two is I don't quite know how to measure it yet, and maybe we could talk more about that at a different time.
My view is that we are concerned about making sure that all students, regardless of what their challenges are getting the support according to our mission. The dashboard, in my view, reflects a district-wide approach. If, when we get a report from Faith or the administration about the specifics of the dashboard, I would anticipate hearing at that point in time at a board meeting of the 85.6% of the students who are attending 90% of the time, let me take that back, of the 14.4% percentage of the students who aren't attending 90% of the time. This is their breakdown. This is the common demographics that subgroup has. And this report to the board, it wouldn't be on the dashboard, but it would be a report to the board that identifies what the demographics and component of that subset is. And then I would also anticipate at the same time, or shortly thereafter, receiving recommendations from the administrative team. This is how we're going to address and focus on that So that percentage will grow and will continue to grow. Segregating out a certain demographic of our district and making that a point on the dashboard makes me uncomfortable.
I had written down, and you mentioned it before, I agree with you, I don't want to segregate a particular group, but we talked a lot about the achievement gap, and so I would be interested in some measure of closing that achievement gap, however that's defined, but it's certainly not, by individual population groups, but something built around that was something that I had written down.
And do we think that it's an important part of each year when I produce the student learning report, or something for the dashboard? Like if you think about the student achievement report, it had for our ACT, non-low income, low income, certainly I have lots of that data that can be brought there, and it is something that I do look at even by school and by grade level, out of the elementaries and at the middle school. What does that look like? Or is it something that we're feeling needs to be on the dashboard?
I think Brad's point about, what makes up that 14 or 15% in that case, what are the categorization, what can we define the group to be that's not achieving the desired result, or whatever you want to call whatever we're trying to measure here, again, 85%, if there's 15% of them, we can say that they all have 10 fingers on one hand, and they have 10 fingers on one hand. So whatever that is, then we, there's something that it's trying to focus on the getting it to be better is what I would like to see, and if we can then focus it on a group or whatever the categorization would be to try to identify how we can improve it. Because again, every one of these statistics I've literally looked at for 5 years now that are hardly move 1 inch. And they may not be as high as I want them to be. So, why is that, how do we achieve that getting higher unless we know what group we're not, or what types of students we are not reaching, and how do we get them to be better, I guess is and I think that point was well taken,
Clarify my point, I wasn't talking specifically to the attendance.
Yeah.
I was talking in general, and
Right.
I think it's an important measure that we get measured against, these newspaper ratings and magazine ratings, we get measured on that. So whether it's the dashboard or whether it's something we see often, I think it's something that's important if we're doing a good job as a school district. I don't know where it goes, I just think it's not attendance.
No.
I'm wondering if we need to continue to go on to the narrative piece, because some of what you were talking about is, I wanted to have some things on here of like, where are we going? What are the things we're doing to improve our learning environment? That we can say, yes, we're working toward, and be able to share with staff, and not have it only be by percentages. I can say, I'm gonna lose 10 pounds, and I can get up every morning and weigh myself. But if I don't have a plan for how I'm gonna do it, and kind of keeping track of if I'm gonna work out, or if I'm gonna stop my chocolate habit, or if I'm gonna, those kinds of things. So I wanted to talk a little bit more about the learning environment piece. Universal access continues to just be a huge deal. We've got more and more students there, and teachers that are collaborating online, creating things through Google Classroom. We put out a survey back in February. We had 86% of the staff say, yes, I have that right balance. I'd like us to move forward on that and get even more. Right now, we have devices and hotspots available for our students from low-income families, but it's at middle school and high school. And I hear all the time, what about for elementary? How do I do this? How do those pieces? And I think if we're really moving toward that universal access piece, that's someplace that we need to go as well. Also, with all of the work doing on multi-tiered systems of support and all of those different interventions that we put in place for our students, some of which are low income, some of which aren't, but our English learners, how we do all of that. We've got quite a bit of work to do. We've begun it with our reading, math, behavioral, and SEL. And where we're looking at, you should see the school improvement plans. I know they're getting posted here on all the websites in a few days. A lot of really great work by our schools and our systems to have more interventions in place, but a big part of MTSS is improving core instruction for all. not going to move the needle for our struggling students by a pull-out intervention that happens 35 minutes a day. It's gotta come through core instruction. And if that's really hard for our teachers, if we think about the diverse needs that they've got, how do we support that growing population with English learners, with our special needs, how is all that related? So that's a big piece of what we need to do. And we want to make sure that by 2022, we've got more math, reading, and behavioral interventions, but even more importantly, how they all fit together and how they support core. We want to have our SEL behavior expectations, established with all of that. And then we've just begun use of a software system to be able to manage putting students in interventions, monitoring whether they've made the amount of progress that we need to, and then getting them back into core instruction. Spent a lot of time with Joanne just training a huge group of staff elementary on this, and we want to get that going, but then get it to middle school and also be talking about it at the high school level as well. So big pieces of how we want to move the needle. Here are some indicators of things that we're going to do, so they aren't in percentages, but they're part of that action plan of what needs to be done to move us forward. I also want to spend time talking about applications into real-world situations. Yes, we've done some great things. Our high schools do great science modeling. We've got engineering practices. We've got the entrepreneur. We've had some real excitement over incubator and mobile maker. Some things that we need to do. K-12 writing and production instruction with real-world application. What does that look like? How do we have students not only write, but create videos, create other ways of demonstrating their understanding. Our attention spans, it's not the, well, let's write a 20-page paper or the white paper. Everything is consolidated into how do we get an impact within a short amount of time. And we need to train our students for that piece as well. Problem-based learning is something I really want to look into, especially at the middle school world, where you've got students working on creating a real-world solution to a real-world problem. How do they communicate that, collaborate that, work together? Some really great applications for our learning environment if we were to do more of that. And then internships, especially at the high school level. And that doesn't necessarily mean you've got a whole year off that you're doing an internship, but how do we get more experiences into what kids are actually going to be doing so that they are applying those skills and being able to take some opportunities to fail or to learn before they're out in the real world to do that. And I'd like to see us do more of that. With the differentiation, personalization, and individualization, we've really expanded that time already for grades 1 and 2 in math, and we're working on it for what it looks like for 3 through 5. We've been doing that with guided reading and looking at all of that, but we need to expand our choices for how kids learn, especially at the high school level, where we've already started our digital learning continuum, where there are some classes that are all face-to-face, we have some that are online. I'd like to see some middle ground in there, where we're looking at, for example, a U.S. government class where you might choose to take it face-to-face, you might choose to take it online for ELO, but you might choose to take a class where the class meets 3 days a week, and 2 days a week you have an opportunity to go somewhere else in the building, get some extra help, be able to really, so it's kind of that piece in between those two sides of the continuum. I think we need to expand our summer school online courses to allow for some more choice, not only with summer school, but by taking some of those requirements all there, you have the opportunity to take more electives and have some more choice in your high school curriculum. And then staff professional development has to be a key of all of this. We've kind of kept that separate, but I'm wondering if it should be part of how we monitor and support our learning environment, of what does that report look like, how do we support staff to be able to do that. Really excited about the things that we've just built with staff on differentiation, where they got to choose what they needed and they worked within their teams. The middle schools and the high schools are offering a lot of sessions where people can choose from for this next piece. We're building things online a lot that people are asking me about. Hey, I was Saturday and I'm going through and looking at all of these things now because I've built it online, and they can take it and interact with it whenever they want. Just like we're building that learning environment for students, we need to continue to build that whenever right collaborative learning environment for staff too. So I tried to find a way to how do we measure some of those things that aren't easily measured on a standardized test, as well as putting some of the things in place here that we could continue to monitor that will help us on traditional standardized achievement tests by building a better learning environment for everybody, because it's not separate, it's a combined effort. And the more that we can make learning applicable to real-world situations, the more we can differentiate it and personalize it, the more we can provide different interventions and support, it's going to move all of our students along.
You know, I like what you're saying, and I just, you know, I think the biggest problem I have is how do we measure those things? You know, again, you know, like we've think of the last 5 years, how much we've done in technology, how many, you know, more classroom units we have. You know, what is that done anything for us? Has it made the ACTs better? They're still flat, you know. I mean, you know, I guess that, you know, would be a nice thing if there's a way of kind of, from a board point of view, how do we know that? How do, you know, I've heard mixed emotions. We've talked about the PLCs, and, you know, the high school may or may not be, you know, happy with partaking in those, you know, or some, you know. So how do we show them what statistic or what unit of measure to say, you know, this is really important, this is how we've achieved, so on. You know, so those are always the ones where we have kind of verbal, you know, achievements, you know, without the backup of statistics or whatever, you know, it's hard to understand the impact. You know, I would think the impact on the students with the modules for the internet access, you know, that, you know, I would think their achievement would be better, and there, you know, there's a way we measure that. You know, there's, you know, again, it's always the challenge when I look at these goals. How is it impacting? What is it impacting? You know, etc.
I'm wondering, listening to the conversation, and Faith, when you do your, I can't remember, was your report last month or was it in the month before, where we talk about student learning, maybe with some of these numbers, rather than just looking at a number of 92%, maybe we do some scatter plots and we can actually see maybe some of those areas that you're talking about and where some of those students are falling, and how can we get them that little part to move up. Do you understand? Maybe we can do more of that rather than just looking at a number of 85%. Maybe if we broke it down, then maybe you would feel more comfortable in being able to then see, okay, we've got some here, how can we move that up? It breaks it out a little bit more to maybe be able to see what it is that number is doing. I think I'm going to go back to student outcomes here, because I really feel we need a communication one, whether what that looks like. I think that that's something teaching and learning can talk about, you guys talk about, but I think some kind of a communication measure with a student outcome. I'd like to see service, and I love the opportunity for our students. I would like us to eventually set a goal that by the time our students graduate from high school, they've done some kind of blended learning opportunity. Or, I mean, let's face it, in the world today, no matter what your occupation is, you're doing some kind of professional development, most likely online throughout. They need that practical experience. When they're getting into college, there is that. And I'm going to go back to the communication thing. I have a freshman in college this year who's 2 months into the school year. She's written more papers than she wrote her entire time at Wheaton North. We need to have some kind of measure there and make sure that they're having enough opportunity. Not just saying writing papers, how can we measure this collaboration? And then the one thing that I see on the other indicators, and I don't know how we do it, and I may ask Joanne to kind of jump in here. I was at the SEL design team on Friday with some great work that was happening where you're creating like a framework or objectives for every grade level. I mean, SEL is such an important part of are there indicators there other than attendance that we should be looking at and monitoring? I talked enough today.
Just one question, Faith. On the last sheet that you showed, where we talked about expansion of courses on digital learning continuing to provide more choices for students. Do you have in mind any specific courses? For example, from time to time, I've been approached by parents high school parents who would like to see an advanced calculus course for seniors who have already taken the available calculus courses. I can see some benefit to identifying specific courses, but then you're going to have your hands tied as well. So
Right,
I'm
on
going
that
back and forth on
particular
that.
one, we're working with the students and guidance counselors to figure out what the interest for some of that would be. Right now, we're looking more at giving current courses a different choice in delivery model, where I know I've met with some of the students that are wanting that above piece. That could almost be a dual credit opportunity that is at that higher level more than the continuum piece. Especially when you get to that advanced degree of math, it might be difficult to do it, you know, a couple of days a week with those pieces. So it was more on here, but we were part of that metric where we're talking about, are we going to expand the opportunity to have dual credit, and those kind of things would be where we might have different types of classes offered than what we currently offer to provide more options, right?
Brad?
All right, so I've been very patient. First off, I think this is one of the most important things we do. I see that second to last line, bring back this in May. I'd like to see it before May, because I think this is going to be lots of conversation over the next 6 to 8 months. So this is more important. You know, we spend so much time on facilities that you got to remember this is what we're here for. And then I think this communication plan, I think it's going to be so important for us to link a communication plan to kind of push out to our community and try to begin for people to understand that it's not all about the SAT score. We have all these other things that we're going to measure ourselves around. You know, some of these goals could be written a little bit differently, like this PBL goal. It could be just implement a PBL class by 2020. We could just make that as a goal, not a student measurement, for example. In terms of the dashboard, a couple quick comments. Two are pretty simple. One, I don't like the word student outcomes.
Okay.
To me, that's like, you know, here's your college and career-ready student. Where will take you if we accomplish all this? So I like the idea of changing the word outcome to something different.
Got a suggestion?
No,
Okay.
not yet.
All right.
Can you go back to the dashboard?
Yeah.
Now, I think the SAT score on the top line is kind of puts the wrong psychology into this.
Okay.
I'd like to put that at the bottom of this table as a suggestion that, you know, there's so many other measurements that are probably more important. The psychology of seeing that first implies
Okay.
that it's the most important thing, and I think, well, maybe in the middle, that's just a thought. The co-curricular, I think in at least one co-curricular activity is a little, very low bar. I would like to see maybe, you know, students in 4 activities over the course of their 4 years in high school, so that it's not just, hey, I did one my sophomore year and I'm done, so therefore we get a good measurement. But I think, and maybe 4 is not the right number, but something that provides a little bit more commitment to a co-curricular activity. Maybe it's not sports. I'd be interested in that, and that kind of goes against some of the things we talked about earlier. And I'd even like to see some kind of measurement separating at the high school and the middle school level. A lot of what's in here seems to be high school. So one of the things I would love to see is a little bit more measures about progress at the middle school level, just as a thought. And then 2 other things that are just ideas to put on there. I think you almost touched on this, but I'd love to see some measurement of the percentage of our students taking an online class through ELO. If that's one of the things that our kids are going to be doing in college and career, I think, you know, to try to encourage students to have that experience would be a very interesting, how are we being successful in that? And then the other thing that, it's not really a student outcome, but I think it's important for us to measure, and maybe this is related to the SEL, but high school student anxiety. I would love to find a way to measure, you know, if we can't measure it, we can try to manage it, and whether that's a dashboard item or something different, but I hear more and more. In fact, you know, Joanne tweeted an article from the New York Times. I did read the article about that issue, and I think that's so critical to student outcomes. But I would love to have something along that line in the conversation about how we're doing. That would be one you want to go down. So it's just a thought. We're not going to resolve it tonight, but it's just an interest. You know, and I tend to favor more measurements, and I understand that kind of management complexity that creates, but you know, I think the more you have, the more abilities you have to work towards individual objectives, and if you just get very few of them, then you're measured on a very narrow lens. And I think so much of what we do has such a broad spectrum that I tend to favor more measurements. That's just my 2 cents.
I kind of want to get an understanding on the curricular with the 4, and I'm taking notes on all of it, but I want to make sure that I understand. With the 4, it kind of depends on the type of activity that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Like if you're a freshman and you come in and you're like, all right, I want to do marching band, and I'm on the football team, and I want to do math team, and I stay with all those, like that seems anxiety prone to having 4 really intensive curricular, that I would do all of that and take AP classes and so we have to be careful about talking, when we think about what type of activity it means.
Right. I don't know how we measure that. I was at a college planning class last night, and they said that,
Yep, I did it again.
and they said that it's not so important, and we probably all heard this, that it's not so important that you're involved in so many activities, but you really focus on a couple and show a commitment and passion to that.
Right.
So I think that having a student in one co-curricular activity is really a low bar. That, oh, you know, I could join an activity 1 year, and I checked it off, and we have great numbers because 90% of our students are in one activity, but I don't think that's what we're trying to accomplish. So my thought was to spread it over a 4-year period, and if they're involved in a series of things, maybe not all at one time, but over the course of 4 years, they've had a continuous involvement through the course of their high school career and being active and developing a passion and interest in something. I don't know what the language is, but I think it needs to be a little bit more than just one activity.
Measure the longevity of being in an activity, the longevity of it.
I mean, a lot of my daughter's developed a career interest based on being in an activity. So how do we measure whether the involvement in an activity is having a significant impact on a student being college and career ready, rather than just being involved? I don't, there's something there, I can't maybe articulate it and figure out how to write it here, but that's something that I like to raise the bar on, and I think it is important.
Not only to write it, but to measure it as well.
Right.
Wasn't the alternatives for determining college and career ready, didn't they mention 2 service projects throughout the course of high
As
school?
one of the options,
Yeah.
not like that everybody, but
It's one of the paths.
I think some of the interactions, such as the co-curricular activities and performance in grades or, ACT score, there might be some correlations that are measurable by those. That's the kind of measurement I see. I think there's also some other measurements as I look at this being a year 22 plan, 2022. There's going to be issues that we're on the tip of, maybe, full day kindergarten. Is that having our students that are involved with full day kindergarten performing better? So that's a goal maybe 4 years out. Economics aside, should we have full-time kindergarten? I think the anxiety includes homework assignments. How many hours a day kids are doing homework? Is that because of their classroom mix? And I think there's going to be statistics, I guess, that will come out of the other studies with like late start for high school and all those kind of things that I don't know that we need to be the measuring unit on that, but I think it's something that we need to be looking at, in our plan. Does that fit in the model or something? So I think the biggest one I see is the all-day kindergarten, whether that has impact or not. So, but again, units of measure, I guess, is the issue.
Right, and that might be a project-based maybe perhaps, or something like an assignment that we're interested in knowing about to put it on. I don't know if it's, because that's something we're interested in looking at. I don't know that it's a unless we can say right now that's what something we want to do by 2020. It seems like more of a, we'd like more information, go find out about it, bring back a presentation on it, than a dashboard thing perhaps. But I'm looking for guidance.
Data, don't we? I mean, since we've been offering, at least I would want to know for the at-risk population that is there, and then how about the typical, I don't know what you would want to call it, but the people who pay the extra, you know, are we seeing, you know, by the time they hit, you know, for both groups, yes, I'm sure the one group, it's made a huge difference, but for the group that's choosing to take and do all-day kindergarten, do we hit a point where they level out with their peers, or are we seeing them excel? I mean, I would think we'd start having enough longitudinal data to be able to start looking at that.
Right.
Again, is that a dashboard item? Is that a
No, I'm
that's a
just
project-
saying,
that's a-
yeah,
Right.
study.
Faith, I have a couple of reactions to both the beginning and the end of your
Okay.
program. Cycling back to the mission statement, I would echo what Chris said. I like the idea of acknowledging the fact that we're not just educating students, but preparing them to be citizens. Somehow, getting that in there somewhere. When you come to the end in your next steps and you're talking about communication plans for parents and community, the two things that come to mind are, one, that the redefining ready is just all over everything these days. So maybe communicating what that is to parents and how we're planning to work with it once we've figured out how we're planning to work with that. And the other piece being that we've used the phrase 21st century learning a lot, and I've heard a lot about that during the referendum, and an awful lot of people saying, what the heck is that, and why do we have to build a special space for it, and that sort of thing. So maybe some way of helping educate the public and parents in particular about what 21st century learning is, what the expectations are for kids moving on, both to the workplace and to college. Because I would agree that presentation skills are everything these days. And my experience has been, at least within rigorous schools, all colleges nowadays seem to be requiring students to take freshman writing intensive classes and seminars, and or having that be part of the requirements in order to get out the other end. So I think communicating, the comm studies class in the high school we have, I think is great, but that feels kind of like 20th century model of communication skills, and maybe doing something to update that to take into the actual presentation piece going forward.
I do continue to look for ways of how do we get the message out to parents that the world is changing. There's more than the ECT score. I struggle a little bit with how to get the right people in the room. I know that I've recently talked with Erica about could we do some live Facebook feeds, where at different times where people didn't have to come in, but they could tune in that way. I do want the opportunity to talk to the PTA group again to get that out there, but they're generally the people that kind of get it already because they're in schools hearing us talk about it all the time. We do need to find a way. I struggle with, I would love to, pack Hubble Auditorium with what that would look like to be able to do that, but what's the draw that we get people to come and hear that? It may be snippets and videos of things that I do. There's that medium again that I love, but we could build some of that to be able to get the word out.
Just for what it's worth, I see more and more school districts now using the term 21st century. This term I see more and more as future ready learning.
Yeah.
I'd like to, in my opinion, get rid of the word 21st century, since a lot of our kids weren't even born.
Right, it's kind of
When we talk a little bit about how do we break these down, I think, as I've heard everybody talking, I think that the answer to what I would like to see is when we have a statistic such as percentage on the road to readiness, 66%, or is our goal. The ones that, if we can identify what I would call subgroups that are those that are not in the 66%, and how we approach solving that or bringing them into the higher standard. I think that's the underlying issue that I was referring to. Is it low-income students? Is it students that had early kindergarten, or, you know, they're involved with too many activities, or whatever, you know, certain correlations that we can develop and then try to approach to solve or bring those numbers up. And so, whatever that category is, and I think I was focusing a little more on that, you know, early learning, or the low-income category, but that may not be the answer, and I don't know that, but that's what I think we need to know as a board. Who are the people that are not getting us to the level we want to be at, and how do we solve, or how do we approach them or get them there? That's, I think, the sum substance of what I've been talking about.
So a couple of things to kind of try to wrap this, at least for tonight, in terms of discussion. So I do want to remind the board of a couple of things. We'll take this feedback, we're going to reflect on it. We can do anything. We cannot do everything. So we are going to have to take some of this feedback, and I get that, you know, I'm all for challenging us as an organization and a school district, but you know, if we spread ourselves across too many goals, we have no goals in terms of our focus. The second part, and I think, you know, Jim, you mentioned this, that again, right, the dashboard represents what do you want to monitor. It does not explain how do you go about monitoring that, what do those reports look like to the board on a annual basis, you know, 2 times a year basis. So I think what you're getting at is part of what will be the expectation around when you monitor an item like, you know, kids, you know, on the road to readiness in math. What does that look like? You know, what is the detailed presentation look like that shows you where you are, what we're working on to get better, which specific populations of, you know, of students. So, you know, again, we're gonna kind of drive from big picture then down to, you know, what does the cycle of monitoring look like? So that I think those elements will be there as we work through this, but we've got to get those big picture, I think, elements identified to work through that. So we'll take some of this feedback, kind of look to when we can circle this back to probably a board meeting for, you know, some further reflection and discussion. You know, again, we started the conversation early intentionally. We have the better part of the school year to kind of work through this and understand what we want the benchmarks to look like. Our current plan takes us through 2018, and so we started this conversation early to give us some time to work through this.
I'd like to see, in light of what you're saying, what you refer to as the most critical goals that we should have, those that would be, we'll call secondary level, that we've talked about, and those that you think are not worth the time at this time to be a, you know, an activity that we can't attack them all. These are ones that will be third tier. So that, you know, that maybe that middle group, or we maybe as a board want to shift communications from column 2 to column A. You know, so, you know, that would be, I would hope, a layout, something like that, that gives us the ability to kind of be flexible on some group of them.
Well, thank you, everyone. Very good discussion about our most important task. We now move to public comments. The opportunity to speak to the board is provided for members of the public who have a question or comment on an agenda item. The board appreciates hearing from stakeholders and values your thoughts and questions. The board strives to make the best decisions for the district, and public input in a variety of venues is very helpful. The board must protect the civility and decorum of this meeting. Please be respectful of the duties of the board, the democratic process in your comments tonight. Please use the microphone, state your name, and whether you are a resident of the district, and address your comments to the board. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Mr. Paulson will be timing, and at the 2-minute 45-second mark, you'll be raising your hand, Mr. Paulson. Please be factual and courteous, and do not include statements that are personally disrespectful or condescending to members of the board or staff. If you feel your matter needs to be discussed in more detail, please attend the board's chance to chat or present your comments to us in writing. The first individual I have signed up is Mr. Doug Gilmore. Mr. Gilmore, are you here?
Yes.
Good evening. Check, check. That's one. Keep talking here while I'm trying to figure out.
This should be one of our goals for 2000.
There's no indicator of light, maybe there's a battery.
Is there no light on it?
No light on it, no.
I haven't started the timer yet, so.
Double A. Just one. Check 1, 2. Anything now?
There it goes.
yeah.
Maybe?
Yeah.
Kind of, sort of. There goes. And see it on the switch. Okay. Good evening. My name is Doug Gilmore, and I have students at Monroe and Wheaton North, and I'm here tonight for two purposes. First is to tell you something that you may not have known because nobody has ever told you, and the second is to ask you to begin doing something about it as a result. My motivating concern stems from errors that I have discovered in certain textbooks. Over the years, I have talked to teachers, principals, and district personnel about this. However, I'm afraid I have failed to elicit in them an understanding of the importance or urgency in this matter. So I'm coming to you to convince you, although it will only be very brief tonight because it's a large problem and this is just an introduction. To put it plainly, there is not enough science taught in the biology classrooms. What is taught from the textbooks is fraught with errors of two different types. Either one, the scientific conclusions that are presented as factual are done so with an unusual sense of certainty when there's actually newer science evidence that changes the conclusions. Or two, the presentation of the scientific reasoning and argument is faulty, either the result of logical fallacies or other reasoning problems. The topics that are most susceptible to these are on biological origins and universal common descent. There are dozens of places in the textbooks where these occur, but since I only have a few minutes, I can only present one issue. So I've picked the first step, which is getting the fundamental building blocks of amino acids and nucleic bases from the so-called prebiotic soupy atmosphere. You probably recall an experiment where they zapped the early atmosphere with lightning to get these molecules. That was an experiment from 1953. However, not long after that, scientists inferred from various pieces of evidence that the early atmosphere used in that experiment was mistaken. That the prebiotic atmosphere was more similar to today's, and further experiments with that understanding of the atmosphere did not produce the necessary biological components. However, instead of fixing the issue in the text over the years, the authors have essentially doubled down on the issue. The latest text in our classrooms mentions the dispute about the atmosphere in one sentence, then proceeds to inform students that in 2008, some work was done with this newer understanding of the atmosphere, and they had a nice bar chart that shows in 2008 results higher, thus getting more amino acids. The problem is that it's simply false. The experiment that they did used the same composition of chemicals as the original experiment from 1953. Therefore, the results, the conclusion, is just as irrelevant as the original experiment. They just injected steam into the experiment instead of boiling water. So, rather than saying that we have no idea where amino acids come from, or that there are significant controversies in the scientific journals about different hypotheses, our textbooks are painting a very rosy picture that all is well with the first step of getting from non-living stuff to living organisms, and this is a big problem. We're told that science is self-correcting, that new science replaces old science. Well, it hasn't in this case, and it hasn't in many other places. So, I'm asking you tonight, since you're the final authority in this district, that you open an inquiry into the errors of the biology textbooks, that you can validate my claims, and then request that the curriculum include more science that demonstrates to the students the true state of affairs with regards to biological origins and common descent. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact me.
Thank you, Mr. Gilmore. Our next speaker is Mr. Chris Ewert.
I won't take much of your time. I know it's late. But I just wanted to quickly say thanks, take a moment to thank the board for the direction that you're taking on Graph Park. I just wanted to express my gratitude and say thank you for that. You know, I don't know everything that went on behind the scenes, but I just want to thank each of you that played a role in that direction, preserving the park. There were others here tonight who had to take off, and I know there's a bunch of other people who couldn't be here tonight that also wanted to express that same gratitude. You know, this is something that's important to us, and we'll still be at the meetings, but we just want you to know in all of this that we appreciate that very much, and we continue to value and respect the work that you do. And I just want to add, on a personal note, I really appreciated the discussion tonight, and I appreciated the concern for helping the kids, you know, who are maybe at a lower level, getting up to that higher level and realizing that they can achieve whatever they want to. So just wanted to say thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you, Mr. Eberly. And would you convey to your neighbors how much we as a board appreciated the respectful and thoughtful comments we heard at the last business meeting? Thank you. I now ask for a motion and a second to adjourn to closed session for the purpose of discussing the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees of the public body or legal counsel for the public body, including hearing testimony on a complaint lodged against an employee of the public body or against legal counsel for the public body to determine the validity pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2 subparagraph C subparagraph 1. Collective negotiating matters between the public body and its employees or the representatives, or deliberations concerning salary schedules for one or more classes of employees pursuant to 5 ILCS 120/2 subparagraph C subparagraph 2. May I have such a motion and a second? Moved by Mr. Hanlon.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Erickson. Mrs. Hutchinson, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Hanlon?
Yes.
Mrs. Erickson?
Yes.
Mrs. Crabtree?
Yes.
Mr. Gambiani?
Yes.
Mr. Matheson?
Yes.
Mr. Paulson?
Yes.
Mr. Vroom?
Yes, the motion to adjourn the closed session is passed. We are hereby adjourned to the open session.